So with no further ado, Mr. G. Edward Griffin.
Thank you so much, Annalisa. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I am so blown away, really. I'm trying to keep my cool, like sitting there like, oh, this is nice. I came very close to breaking out in tears a couple of times during the comments here. This room is so filled with energy and passion and truth and justice. It's just, I just want to come a part of the scene because I never dreamed that I could be a part of this movement. And before I get started on this, I would be terribly remiss if I didn't acknowledge some people here that have gone way beyond the call of duty to put this whole thing together. Everybody gives me credit for it, and I deserve very little of it, except I had an idea, that's all. But there are people, especially in this room, that put that idea into action. And Annalisa is certainly at the top of that list. This, I can tell you, this meeting would not occur without her. It just wouldn't have happened. I often dreamed about doing it, but you need somebody to come and kick you in the pants once in a while and get you moving. And this young lady showed up. And this young lady showed up at my doorstep, as she just described. And she said, I'd like to make an appointment. Okay, fine. What is it? Well, I just want to talk to you about Freedom Force. Well, that's my topic. So I said, okay. I invited her in. Well, it took about 1 minute, and she was telling me what we needed to do. Well, and that normally would be kind of a turnoff for me because I think, well, listen, I thought this thing through. I don't need anybody to tell me what to do. But her ideas were good. I got to thinking, I think she's right. And that's hard for an old guy to do. So I listened very carefully, and it didn't take long before we came up with the idea that we've got to do something to get this movement moving off of dead center, where it had been for a long, long time. And those of you who've read all my announcements on this, you know why it was on dead center, because I told you. It was because we weren't ready. And I had just come to the conclusion of some substantial changes in the structure of Freedom Force when Annalisa showed up. So it was the combination of some long incubation going on with certain ideas and the perfect timing of this dynamic woman showing up and saying, come on, let's do something, So that is why this all happened, because I said, okay, let's go down to my office annex, which is coffee, tea, and bean, or whatever the thing is called. And we started to pencil out the things that needed to be done. And that was only about, 6 weeks ago or so. So here we are, and thank you, Anna. And she's a total volunteer on all of this. She's donated so much of her time and her talent and her experience. So I thank you very much. And then here locally, golly, how can I thank Jerry Stinchfield enough? Now, she's an old timer here. I don't mean old. I mean old timer. That's different. And if it weren't for Jerry, we wouldn't know anybody locally. We wouldn't have known where to go to put on the venue here. We needed her guidance and advice and her introductions to local people. So you've all met Jerry. She's the delegate here. And Jerry, thank you so much for what you've done. And then this son in her. Have you seen this guy? He's a big strapping guy. He's just, I thought, well, he's going to give me some muscle, some brute force. I need that too. But this guy's loaded with ideas, and he's read all of the stuff. He's got the ideology down 100%, and he's thinking all the time of how we implement this and strategize that. He's a genius, actually, and he has donated his body and his brain to this movement totally. As somebody said earlier, it's for the rest of your life. And Jason Stinchfield has done that. And fortunately, the rest of his life is a lot longer than some of us here. So we get a lot more of that activity from him. And Jason has shown up at the weirdest hours and he's said, well, I'm here. Can I lift heavy boxes or can I do whatever you want? Hand out papers or, he helped with he painted this thing and, everything. He's everywhere. You talk about me being everywhere. Jason is everywhere at once. So, and Jason, thank you so much where you are. And then finally, Chris Kopak back there running the streaming video. He's a genius. I don't know how to do this stuff. He walks me through it. Says, "Well, if you can get this thing loaded on your website, give me the code. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it." So he's put this together. I have been at a lot of meetings, and I'm sure you have too, where they've had streaming video going, except for one problem: it never works. I can't think of any meeting except, well, there were a couple where they had big expensive operations, big crew from Hollywood or something. But, normal meetings like we go to, we got streaming media. Oh, yeah? Yeah, where is it? Well, it's not working. Well, we'll work on it next time. It's actually working, I think, and that's all thanks to Chris. And he runs a shop here. You probably have seen it. It's called the Parts Oven. He's one of these geniuses that does 3D modeling, creates parts out of 3D printers and so forth. And you can make absolutely anything. I saw something in his shop the other day where it was a device with moving cogs and multiple parts, and it was all made at the same time. It wasn't assembled. It was all made at one time with moving parts. I mean, where are we going? I mean, with technology, it's amazing, and Chris is on top of it all. So thank you, Chris. And of course, every one of you deserves acknowledgement and recognition and thanks. I know some of you have come from long distances, like, Fani here and Yvonne, they 2 days traveling just to get here, across the big pond, and we have people here from Canada, as you all know each other, and people that come from Florida, and I thought it was a big deal just to come from Thousand Oaks. But so anyway, all of you have come and made a sacrifice of your time and your energy, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. We are going to do great things here, and I was so impressed by the level of not only knowledge. I mean, things that were said here, some of them were very, very deep and revealed to me a really deep understanding of the problem we face. But not only was there this level of knowledge and this grasp of the situation, but there was such purity of purpose and such passion that I just know this thing is going to work. So thank you all for that. And now we'll get on to my part. Now, we are running late, as usual. Have you ever been to a meeting that didn't run late? I don't think I have. So anyway, we'll do the best we can to catch up. Did we get an extension, Annalisa? Did we get an extension at 1? That's why I have.
Yeah, at 1.
At 1.
The time is late, so yes.
All right. Well, I think I can get through this. Fortunately, this is not a formal presentation. So I can sort of skip around it. It's more like a conversation, I think. I didn't really put this together till last night, but it's always been buzzing around inside of my head. So I'm going to have no trouble with the topic. I just may have trouble getting it organized in a way that will make it easier to assemble the pieces. I wish we had one of Chris's parts machines so we could construct a presentation like that, just dial it in. But anyway, here we go. You saw by the program that I had labeled this part of the program, Operation Liftoff, which you all know is the shorthand description of the phase that Freedom Force is in right now. Liftoff meaning that we've been on the pad for quite a while, and some people have become very discouraged over the years because we didn't lift off sooner. But I want to emphasize something I said in one of my announcements, maybe the first one. It's very important. I knew that we must not lift off. We could have launched forward and just said, okay, we're gonna set up a board of directors and we're gonna have bylaws and all that sort of thing. But I knew that it had no rudder. There was no way to keep the organization true. And we're going to be talking about what that means shortly, keeping an organization true. True to what? True to its principles. Most organizations don't have principles. How could you expect them to be true to their principles? They just don't have them because they're hard. It's hard to get everybody on the same page on principles. And that's too bad, but it's necessary. It may mean that an organization has fewer members, but it means that the members it does have are in unison and they're all on the same page. And unfortunately, in many groups that I've been familiar with over the years, it seemed to be that the leadership was more concerned with numbers than results. They just thought that it was like having a big organization and big meetings and all that sort of thing. That was important, but what they were going to do was not so important. Everybody knew what they didn't want. They didn't like being pushed around. They didn't like the loss of liberties, but they weren't able to agree with each other on what they wanted. That what they wanted was, well, that thing called freedom. Well, what does that mean? It means different things to different people. And I had not ever seen an organization that actually defined what freedom meant. And that was one of the reasons that I formed Freedom Force, because I felt that was a void. How can you build something if you can't even define it? So anyway, that's the reason that we have this organization. And it's one of the reasons that we're going to talk about the roadmap and the blueprint and then finally the miracle of commitment. I'm going to cut the roadmap section short because of the limit of time. We can talk about that tomorrow if you wish to know about the background. We're all going to be at the barbecue up at my pad up there in the hills. And if you want to know about this background, I'd be glad to talk about it then. It's interesting, but it's really not that essential to what we have to do here today. I'll tell you how it began in 2002. It was in the Dominican Republic actually is where it started. But I won't go into that, except it's an amazing story because we started off truly international at that point. We didn't know what we were going to do. I had an idea, and people were at this conference, and I was one of the speakers there, and I was giving a talk on the problems of the world. And everybody was on the podium was giving talks about the problems, this problem, that problem, that problem. And nobody had a real solution. But nobody cared. It's sufficient to talk about the problem. Well, I was thinking that, why don't we have a solution, everybody? You know, and they say, yeah, well, you got one? I said, of course I got one. You want to hear about it? And some silly people said yes. So we all assembled in the meeting, and I told them this thing was buzzing around in my head, and we had, what do we call it? We'll call it Freedom Force. Anybody want to get in? Well, everybody signed up, and they all came forward and put $20 or $50 or something on the table. So you need some money. Well, yeah, I guess. We had an organization. We didn't know what we were going to do with it. Anyway, that's the story I'll tell you tomorrow if you're interested. That's how it began. Where we are now, you know, we are on this liftoff stage. And the really important thing, the hinge that is going to turn here today, is that we will turn this thing from a one-man operation, a one-man band, which it has been pretty much, into a real organization with a life force of its own, with a board of directors, leadership council, guardians, and we got this all figured out. We probably made some mistakes, but that's okay. We'll correct them as we go. It's going to happen today. So that from now on, it's not just one person. You know, I've often thought, what would happen if I got old, for example? What would happen if I got hit by a meteor or something? Then everything would just sort of stop. And that used to bother me a lot. But I'm going to go to bed tonight knowing that it won't make any difference because it will go on. That's the crux of what we're going to do here today. And you folks are going to carry that load now, part of it, and you're going to feel good doing it. So that's the short way of describing it. Where we're headed is, it's hard to describe that because the world has never been there before. The world has never really seen a system based upon a formula of freedom. And if, not only of freedom, but a formula that includes a mechanism for keeping the program pure, to prevent deviation from the founding principles, if there are principles. You know, nations are formed, and usually the nation is in pretty good agreement at the time of what they all believe in. They have a certain culture, a certain frame of reference, and they're unified because usually they've had to throw off some kind of a tyranny. So that's the unifying force. And it's negative, it's a negative force. But the nation is generally unified. Then, as has happened so often in history, and certainly happened here in America, things get really good. We have freedom, we have affluence, we have leisure time. And the old folks die off and the young ones come along, and they begin after a couple of generations to forget what those original founding principles were. And that just has happened over and over and over again. So it seemed to me, as I became aware of this, and I studied it in my younger years, that there's got to be a way to keep those founding principles alive. And that means there has to be a group of people, I've come to call them the guardians, that realize the importance of this. I know it's not going to be 51% of the population. That never, 51% of the population never determines anything, not even elections, you know, because they can be driven by their leaders and they can be manipulated into voting in ways that their manipulators have mastered, and they don't even know they're being manipulated. So it's not a question of 51%, it's like that's 3% or 1%, so forth. So this, how do you keep those principles in the hearts and minds of the leaders of society? That's always been one problem. I thought there's got to be a way to solve that. And then secondly, how do you prevent leadership rot, is what I have come to call it. How many times have we seen good men and women start off with pure desires, pure instincts, pure motives, but they become corrupted by money, power, blackmail, maybe just degradation of morality, whatever, and they become corrupted. We've seen it over and over again, haven't we? How do you prevent that? Is it possible to prevent that? We'll be talking here about the necessity for us to come to power. Well, maybe this is a good time to talk about it. Maybe not in the right place in my outline, but it's a good place to talk about it. We need to come to power. I remember when I was a young agitator, you might call it, for freedom. I would stand up before groups and I would say, power, political power, it's evil, it's dangerous. And I would quote Lord Acton, would say, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it just rolled from the tongue, you know. And it's true, it is true, nothing wrong with it. But what the problem was the conclusion you come to having said that and having recognized that it is true. The conclusion I and many others had come to was that therefore we must reject power. If it's dangerous and it has the potential to corrupt, therefore we must reject it. Those are two thoughts. They're not joined in at all, but they were in my mind, and they still are in the minds of a lot of people today. So I would preach against power. Our goal is to eliminate power, you know. It's because you can't live with it. It's like a dangerous rattlesnake. Well, it is kind of like a dangerous rattlesnake, but you can live with dangerous rattlesnakes. In fact, I do up there. And guns are dangerous, aren't they? Guns are very dangerous. People can get killed with guns. Accidents happen with guns. Oh, it's a terrible thing. Guns should be outlawed, right? The only thing more dangerous than having guns is not having guns. Okay. So there's the analogy, and I finally got that all straightened out in my mind. Yeah, power is dangerous. It's corrupting. The only thing more dangerous than political power is not having any. And so there is the change in my awareness that happened some years ago, is that we had to have power, or you can't overcome existing power unless you have equal or greater power. It's as simple as that, and our enemies know that. That's why, one of the reasons our enemies have always been winning, because they're not afraid of power. They reach for power. They grab it for power. Lenin was perhaps the greatest teacher on that. You know, I don't want to get too deeply into that, but I spent a lot of time in my early days hanging out in the communist bookstore in Los Angeles. It was the People's Bookshop down on Larchmont. And the comrades down there thought that I was a recruit, you know, so they invited me to all of their meetings and their coffees and their discussion groups, and I eagerly went. And I'd go out loaded up with all these books by Stalin and Lenin and Marx, you know, and I'd read them. I think I read more of them than they did, because I got to be pretty good at quoting these communist theoreticians. And Lenin was brilliant on that. And so I would go to these meetings, and they would try to recruit me and so forth. But anyway, I don't know why they wanted me. I always had the white narrow tie on, you know, and I figured that they wanted some kind of a mole inside the establishment or something. Anyway, Lenin, you know, he's such a quotable guy. He would say things like, promises are like pie crusts made to be broken. You know? Well, in politics, that's right. In politics, and he's the master strategist. And he would say, there was one thing, it was one famous paper of his, as I recall, it was called the issue of nationalism, international. It had to do with nationalism. It had to do with using nationalism as a means of coming to power. See, Lenin was all about coming to power. Marx was the theoretician, and Lenin was the practical guy. He was the organizer. Marx would talk about you know, the theory of redistribution of wealth, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, and all that stuff, and the ideological side of the movement. But by the time Lenin came along, he said, forget all that stuff. It's good. Yeah, we all believe that. But now let's talk about how we come to power. We'll never come to power quoting Marxism, you would say. What we have to do is pretend like we're anti-Marxists. We must tell the people that we are anti-communist and we hate communism. So they will follow us, and they will get us into positions of responsibility and authority and power. Once we're in power, he would say, then we win. So we tell them, well, we changed our minds. Promises are like pie crusts made to be broken. You see, the whole idea is once you're in power, the debate ends, because if somebody wants to debate you, you shoot them. You've got the police and the military. You're in power. You win. And I knew all of that, but I never lined it up with our movement until one night I was thinking about that. And literally, and this is the truth, it was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I guess I was thinking about it in my dreams or subliminally, and I sat up and I was thinking, oh, that's right, we reject power, we lose. It's as simple as that. So then coming to that harsh reality and having to change my head around, I said, okay, we have to have power, so now we better figure out a way to prevent that power from subverting and corrupting our own leaders, including ourselves, if we should get into a position like that. And I've spent a lot of my life since then debating in my own mind and thinking about how we can do that. I knew that the partial answer was provided by Jefferson after the Constitution had been ratified. A friend of his, who was a doctor, sent him a letter, and in the letter, the doctor says, "Oh, Mr. Jefferson, now that we have the republic, and you have all of these representatives going into positions in this new government, how can we be sure that only good men get into positions of power? Only good men. How do we keep only good men from getting into power? That's the issue, isn't it?" And Jefferson's response, if you've read this, I don't know if you came across this, but it was brilliant. It was almost, you could hear the anger right off of the printed page or the handwritten page. He said, "Speak to me not of good men. Rather, let us bind men down with the chains of the Constitution." And there it was in general form. He would say, "You think only good men are going to go into politics or into government? Dope. Duh. No. All the crooks are going to try and get in there because government is a magnet for the predator class." Jefferson knew that. People don't think about it that way today. That's why are all the crooks in government? Because government, and we'll come to that in a minute, is a magnet for the predator class. And so Jefferson was saying, no, if you think you're going to have a government without evil men, only good men, you're not really in keeping with reality. He said, rather we should design methods in a constitution, we should all agree to these methods to prevent evil men from doing evil. Don't give them the power for them to do evil. Don't give them the power. So I knew that was the general outline, or I thought that was it. I thought Jefferson was right. But how do we do that? It's easier said than done, isn't it? Well, I finally think we have the secret to it. I don't say that in a boastful way at all. I just think that what I finally came to the conclusion of, it was so simple. It was there staring us all in the face. It's right there. Part of the answer is that you have to have an idea of what is the limit of state power, first of all. The real question, or the real problem with this issue is that even those of us who talk about the republic, even those of us that talk about limited government, we get it all mixed up in our brain. How many times have you, and I know me also, have I said, we want limited government? Yeah. What an oxymoron that is. Limited government? Like limited pregnancy or something like that? What is the purpose of government? To govern. Anybody here want to be governed?
No.
I don't know. I haven't met anybody that wanted to be governed. And yet we use this word government as though it's a wonderful thing. We're saying, well, we want to be governed, but not too much. Well, what is too much? Okay, there. So the key to the answer to this problem is that you have to have a philosophy or an ideology of what is the proper role of the use of coercion, the use of power of the state. What is the justification to restrict somebody's freedom, to punish them, or to kill them? Is there a justification for that? And there is, of course. Where does it come from? It comes from the innate right of every one of us as individuals, not the collective, but as individuals, we have a right to protect ourselves. And we can use coercion or lethal force. I don't think anybody would challenge you if you killed another human being who was trying to kill you and it was strictly an act of self-defense. Who could blame you for that? Some would. I know there are some, but not many. Okay. I wouldn't, certainly. I think that's a natural right of self-defense. You have a right to protect your life, your your liberty and your property. And you can use any means you can think of to do so. But beyond that, no, no, no. That's it. And so once we get this gyroscope in our mind spinning fast enough that the only justification for the use of lethal force is defensive, not aggressive, but defensive, to defend our lives, liberty, and property, and then if that's the only justification we have for using force or coercion, then that's the only justification we can give to an elected representative, because his power comes from us. So if we cannot use force against our neighbor to force him to close his shop on Sunday, for example, then we can't delegate that power to an elected representative who can say, well, now that I'm elected, I can pass a law and force you to close your shop on Sunday, or whatever, to turn off your lights at 9:30, or to use a fluorescent bulb instead of an incandescent bulb, or whatever it is. We get this idea that it's a good thing for you to do. If we can't force you to do it as an individual, then we cannot delegate that same authority or that power to an elected group. And therein, as simple as that concept is, therein lies the key to how, or at least half of how, we keep good men in office, by rejecting the magnet that attracts the evildoers, as Mr. Bush would say. The evildoers are attracted to this unlimited power. They can now, they're a bunch of crooks in their own minds, right? And they know that they want to steal and manipulate from other people, but if they do that, they're probably going to go to jail or might get beat up or might get shot by somebody. Who knows? But now they can go get elected and they can do the same thing, and they're big heroes and they get fat paychecks and drive around in limousines for it and so forth. So that's the magnet that attracts the predator class. If we take that magnet away and we have a firm belief of what we believe in as the proper function of the state. Now notice I say state, not government. That was the one change I had to make when I drafted the first part, the Creed of Freedom in the beginning. I used the word government. I made the same mistake that the Founding Fathers did. Founding Fathers used the word government because that's the word that everybody used in those days. You know, what kind of a government do you have, Mr. Jefferson? What kind of a government do you have, Mr. Franklin? Oh, well, the government we have, and they were tricked into using the wrong word. If they had just said, this is not a government, then what is it? This is a protectorate. The purpose of this state is not to govern us, but to protect us. To protect our lives, liberty, and property. Nothing more. That's what we have created here. Thank you for asking. If they had used a different word, as I had now begun to use in the last few years, I don't use the word government anymore, except in a derogatory way. Governments are what we don't want. Now, I'm not being an anarchist here. I'm not saying get rid of the state. A lot of people think, well, if you don't want the government, then you want anarchy. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a state that's there to protect us, our lives, liberty, and property. We have police force, we have a court system, we have a penal system, all of that to protect us, not to govern us. So this is a short version of the solution to that problem, at least half of it, is that once we have this idea of what is the proper function of the state, we're halfway there to solving that seemingly impossible puzzle. The other half is to set in motion a mechanism whereby the people themselves, or a small group of the people themselves, who really care about these things, can remove leaders who violate that rule. If we all agree to that rule, then sure as shooting, somebody's going to come along, a leader is going to violate that rule once they get into office. And well, how do you get rid of them? So what we have come up with here, ladies and gentlemen, with Freedom Force, is that we have, first of all, a Creed of Freedom, which I will address here shortly. The Creed of Freedom includes the principle of the negative use of coercion. which is so essential. And the other part is not in the creed, but it will be in the Constitution of Freedom Force, which is a mechanism whereby a highly informed and highly motivated group of people, such as we have in this room here today, will be in a position to remove any leader, including the top dog, anytime, in their view, that leader has violated his pledge to the creed of freedom. And it won't be a general election. It won't involve all the people that don't know or don't care. A certain subgroup that are truly said to be guardians. That is built into the new structure for Freedom Force. I believe it will work. I don't know that it will work. It's never been tried before. I think it's time to try it, you know? It's the kind of exciting thing. Let's see if it works. It might not work, but I know one thing, nothing else has worked. So that's what we're going to do. And I have to tell you something, a little bit of a fantasy of mine. And it goes back to the question of, well, Mr. Griffin, what do you think about world government? And of course, they expect me to say, I'm opposed to world government. And I'm not. Well, what? Oh, we finally found this guy out. He's on the other side, you know. I have a question to ask before I answer that question. And my question is, what kind of a world government are we talking about? It makes a difference, doesn't it? Well, it really doesn't if we use the word government, you see, we're stuck there. The question would be, what kind of a world political system or state? Got to get rid of that word government, because that's a predetermined answer to the question. A world government is a government. It'll govern us. And we don't want that. So if we had a world state or a world constitution, a world political body that was based on the principles of freedom and the principle that the state should not use coercion except in defense of life, liberty, and property, and that's it, I think it'd be a hot dog thing if it was international. The bigger the better, as long as that magnet is not there to attract the predator class. So now my fantasy is that the Constitution of Freedom Force that has been in the making and will be finalized here very shortly will become more or less like a template for political constitutions at any level, city level, county level, national level, international level, because it will involve the principles of the removal of that coercive power for positive purposes. Positive, most people think, oh, if it's positive, that's good. No, it's not necessarily good. If you grab hold of a positive wire and you're standing in water, it's not good, you know. Positive has different meanings. And so nobody wants to say, well, I'm opposed to positive force, because it sounds like you're going to be a negative personality. No, positive in this sense means aggressive, the use of force to accomplish something other than defensive. In other words, you want to make things different in society. You want to distribute wealth. You want to provide jobs, education, Medicare, housing, you know, euthanasia, whatever you decide is good for society, you're going to use this coercive power aggressively rather than defensively. So that's what I'm talking about when I say we want to be negative rather than positive. So you put those two things together, and I think that the principle that we've designed here for Freedom Force to make sure that the leaders of this organization now and in the future can be removed by a smaller group of members called the Guardians, and that principle can be then expanded to a political system. I think we've got something that is different. I know it's different. It's never been tried before in history. And I'm not naive enough to think that everybody's going to jump on the bandwagon tomorrow and say, yeah, let's try this in the United States. You know, let's get rid of those bums in Congress and change the Constitution or add this to it. So I know that's not going to happen right away. But ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at the long view of history. if somebody doesn't start this idea and start the ball moving now, even though it's a little tiny pebble starting to move, it'll never get started. And this is, I think, a good place to do it. And in a way, it seems bizarre, but it's true. I think that the harsh times we're seeing and those big, dark storm clouds of political havoc that are descending upon us is a good thing, because it will cause people to consider a drastic change such as this. If everything is comfortable, you know, we can get along just fine, maybe a little discomfort here, a little discomfort there. Nobody is going to get up out of their rocking chair and say, okay, I'm ready for a change. Let's do something drastic. So I know that's a little bit of rationalization. I would rather be in my rocking chair like you all would too. But I think that the one good thing about the tragedy that is happening to the world today is that it is forcing people to open their minds and to consider changes. And Lord knows we need a change in the way political systems are run today. So the bottom line of all that is that I'm hoping that our Constitution, it'll be called Constitution rather than bylaws, but they're essentially the same thing. You know, they're just the rules that an organization follows. I think that hopefully they will become a template for political systems as well. Now, I've just been talking off the top of my head. I haven't even been looking at my outline, but let me see where that plops us. Oh yes, I gave you a couple of charts. Let's start with this chart here. You see it says Freedom Force in the center and all these PCs around and figures. What is that all about? Actually, everybody have one?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, this brings us to the second part of in my presentation, which falls under the heading of blueprint. You've seen that on the outline. I'm supposed to be talking about some kind of a blueprint. Well, I have been talking about a blueprint a little bit, but now let's get down to specifics. The specifics are, what is unique about Freedom Force? One of the problems I have had all this time is that people would come into the organization and they like the idea of us being different from all other organizations because they're fed up and burned by other organizational activities, and they know that nothing is happening or nothing enough is happening. So they want us to be different. But then when they come in, they want us to do exactly the same as every other organization does. And say, well, how come we're not out there with placards, you know, and demonstrating, you know, in favor of something or opposed to something? How come we don't have letter writing campaigns and all that sort of thing? And then I have to sort of, well, slow down a little bit. There are plenty of good organizations doing that, and they need to be doing that, but that's not our role. We're not going to be just another one of an activist organization. I mean, there's plenty of room for more, but that's not our role. Ours is a little bit different. Ours is to provide sort of an ideological umbrella over a movement, to get all of the organizations that have the interest in voluntarily signing on to our method and our ideology to be united on principle, just principle, not issues, on principle. The things I've been talking about, you know, what is the proper role of the state? What is the proper solution? Do we want the government to take care of things? I mean, we have people, for example, now, a lot of people, they've read Creature from Jekyll Island. And they, yeah, those dirty bankers, those dirty, rotten bankers, look what they're doing to us. What we need to do is close the Federal Reserve System down and turn it over to the Treasury, because we can trust those politicians, you know? hey, they're not ready for Freedom Force, you know? That's what I'm talking about. They don't understand that the problem with the monetary system is the creation of money out of nothing. And it doesn't make too much difference whether it's done by the bankers or the politicians. It's still the creation of money out of nothing. And it's true, if the politicians do it, the bankers get cut out of their interest. That's true, and so that's why they fight for their role. But it doesn't help us at all if we turn it over to the politicians. We just knifed out the bankers from their free ride, but we're still in the poorhouse, you know? So that's an example of why it's necessary for people to understand the ideology involved in our fight for freedom. Because if they don't get that clear, if they don't know the difference between individualism and collectivism and are really firm on that, then they're going to fall for some collectivist false solution to a problem, and they're going to fall right into the same trap of history where we've seen it happen, where people have thrown off a tyranny with great cost and treasure and blood, only to replace it by another one just as bad or maybe even worse. So I got sidetracked on that. So what is different about Freedom Force? Well, the first thing is the structure. You probably, if you've seen that video that has been up on the internet about Freedom Force, where I start off by saying fasten your seatbelts, you know, all that fun, and put up your tray tables. It's going to be a very bumpy ride. In that one, I talked about the holographic nature of Freedom Force. Does anybody not know what I'm talking about here? Or are you all familiar with it? Who is not familiar with the holographic? Okay, not familiar, just only one. Well, Edward, okay, for you, I'll make.
Maybe you were talking about that particular analogy, casting the seatbelts as paper. I never saw that.
Okay, well, I'll just make it very clear, because I think for the purpose of our video and everything, this probably should be stated. There are different kinds of organizational structures. The most common one is the pyramidal form, where you've got the leadership at the top, and then the management in the middle, and then the rank and file at the bottom does all the work. And that's the typical organization for the corporation, certainly a military organization. And it happens to be the same type of organization that most patriotic groups adopt, just because it's the common one, and it seems like there's no other choice for them. And there are many problems with that kind of a structure. I don't need to go into you. All of you are individualists. You know, you've been involved in organizations where there are power struggles and all that thing, where the leaders lose sight of the goal of their movement. Now it's more important to get to the top, or then they splinter off because they want their own organization and their own revenue sources and all that sort of thing. And that always happens in pyramidal organizations. You always have power struggles and that kind of thing. And that also makes it very easy for the leadership to be corrupted, because that means power is focused and brought to the top. And power is almost as good as money. Well, money is just a form of power, so it's really power that corrupts people. So another organizational structure is called the holographic structure. And that is where there is no concentration of power at the top. It's like a hologram. And you know, a hologram, you take up one of those holographic plates and you shine rarefied light through it. It looks like there's a three-dimensional image that appears in space. I don't really understand how that works. I just know that it does. And so that's kind of an amazing thing. But yet, if you take a pair of scissors and cut it in half, that sheet, even a more amazing thing happens. Now you have two images, completely the same, but two of them. And you cut those in half, now you've got four images, complete images. And you can cut that down theoretically to an infinite point, and each little piece will have the whole image. Not as big, of course, but the whole image will be there. Well, that's the kind of a structure that I think that the movement of ours needs to be, the holographic structure. So, you know, if you have a patriotic movement and you happen to be an enemy of that patriotic movement with a great deal of money and power and influence in the media, you can destroy that organization simply by destroying the leadership. You can destroy their credibility. You can demonize them in the press. You can tell the nation that this person is tax evader, a drug dealer, a child molester, or whatever. And most people will believe it if they read it in the paper. I mean, I've seen that happen. I had a doctor friend who was standing up against the medical establishment and using a non-traditional form of cancer therapy. And in fact, I wrote a book about it, World Without Cancer. And they came after him, and they raided his office, and they took his stuff out of his office, and he detained all of his patients that were sitting there, and they made sure they had photographers there to take pictures of it, and they all got in the newspaper. So that night, there are pictures in the newspaper of Dr. Richardson with handcuffs behind him being led out by police, you know? And people looked at the newspaper, oh my goodness, I thought he was such a nice person. They just assume that if it's in the newspaper, it's true. That's all they have to do in most cases to destroy an organization is to demonize the leadership. It will happen to us. Hasn't happened yet, but it will. The only reason it would not happen is if the organization does not have a big bald-headed leader there, you know, to lead the group. What if the organization leadership was diffused and there was nobody to attack? Or you could attack him, but you say, well, he's just an executive. That's all. He doesn't make decisions. So the holographic model, I think, is the only model for a movement like ours, so that every member of this movement has a complete image of what we're trying to do, built into their brains and in their souls. So that if every member was eliminated except one, they had 100,000, 500,000 members, and for some reason they were all rounded up and shipped off into outer space, but they left one behind. That one person would have the whole image of the organization and could begin to rebuild it from that. Kind of like a freedom virus, you know? That's the model. Okay, that's what I mean by the holographic model, and we'll talk more about that. However, there were some problems with that. I have to admit that, and I didn't know quite what they were until I read a book, and I recommend it to you highly. It's called The Starfish and the Spider. The Starfish and the Spider by, the subtitle, you'll get it, The Unstoppable Power of Leaderless Organizations. And it was written by Ori Rathman and Rod Beckstrom. And it was all about organizations that have no leaders, like movements that happen on the internet. The movements happen on the internet, like these revolutionary movements spring up in opposition to tyrannical governments. And so these governments are concerned about, you know, iPads and iPhones, because organizations spring up spontaneously. There's no leader. They don't know who to kidnap. There's nobody to kidnap. It's just a bunch of people all working together with a common cause. And he talks about that kind of a thing. And then finally, in the last chapter, he comes up with the brilliant concept that there are hybrid organizations. There is a need, and he mentions, you know, some of those in the commercial world, where it's not enough just to have uncontrolled, random action of people interacting with each other, because they don't last. They splinter, they diffuse, they change direction. It's like water going down the landscape, going straight and hits a rock, and then it's going over here, and then it hits a hole, and it goes down here, and so forth. Those kinds of organizations tend to get sidetracked, and they lose their focus. But a hybrid organization is a little different, and that is the kind that I'm talking about, where you have sort of like a central command center or a leadership center, where they just worry about the direction of the movement. They don't pass individual rules and regulations, and they don't, you know, try and tell everybody that you can or cannot do this. It's not the idea at all. It's just that there are certain rules. It's almost like running, I'm just making this up now, like if you wanted to run a monastery, the rule would be no women, you know, something like that. Very few rules. But beyond that, once you're in the monastery, you can pray the way you wish. You can do the kind of work you wish to do, just no women. It's that kind of a thing. There's very few basic principles in a movement that have to be enforced. Otherwise, the movement could go every which way. And so what we have come up with is a hybrid organization, which is basically holographic in nature. Now, much more to be said about that, but we have to move along. So now, the next question is, well, how do you recapture control? How do you recapture your liberties? You talk about these things, everybody, yeah, that's good. Everything you say is good, but how do you do it? What's your strategy? Write letters to your congressman? I mean, your congressman is the problem. You know, what do you want to do that for in most cases? It's not all. No, it's not it. Well, how? The answer is here, is that we will recapture our system, our political system, the same way we lost it. And we did lose it in a certain way. It didn't just happen. It happened in accordance with a strategy. And this strategy is taught. It's a model. I first discovered it when I was studying communism in the People's Bookshop there in Larchmont. I discovered it because the Leninists used this strategy. But so did the Fabian socialists. And so did the Nazis. And so does the Council on Foreign Relations. All of these movements on the other side, these collectivist movements, follow this strategy, and they're very successful with it. And for the most part, we don't even know that there is a strategy that they're following. And the strategy is very simple. It's to infiltrate, in their words, and I'm going to say we're not going to infiltrate, but that's their word, infiltrate what they call power centers of society. A power center, by their definition, is an organization that has influence over the nation's policies. An organization with such influence would be a political party, a labor union, a church organization, a media center, a tax-exempt foundation, a government agency. There are power centers in society where the people who are in those power centers have great influence over the nation's policy. Much more than just going to the polls and voting for some candidate that's been selected by somebody else. Those are the power centers that we have to become influential in. If I may end a sentence, a preposition, with. And so they talk about how you become influential in these power centers, and they focus on that. Educational systems, schools, for example, boards of directors, large corporations. And so you take an organization like the Council on Foreign Relations today, and I'm sure everybody in this room is very familiar with that. This is the model that they have used so successfully ever since Edward Mandell House moved into the White House during the Wilson administration. Because Edward Mandell House, in conjunction with J.P. Morgan, were the ones that founded the Council on Foreign Relations at that time. And as we know, the Council on Foreign Relations is not an activist organization. They don't carry placards. They don't demonstrate for or against anything. They don't lobby. They don't do anything except provide a network of like-minded people with the understanding that those people must become active at the highest levels of the power centers of society. And if you look at that membership list, which is about 4,000 members, you will find nobody on there that isn't influential in a power center of society. You look at the highest levels of government position, all the government agencies, CIA, Defense Department, State Department, President, Senate, all of the committees, they're loaded with members of the Council on Foreign Relations. The great universities. actors even, yes, actors, yeah, artists, but not just creative actors and artists, but the ones that are in charge of artists and creative movie organizations. See, they're always involved in organizations because the goal is to lead the people of the nation. And I learned this lesson when I was a boy. I spent a couple of summers on my uncle's farm, and they had to put me to work, so-called, keep me out of underfoot, I suppose. And one of my jobs was to bring the cows in. Well, the cows were coming in whether I was out there or not. Because
They're hungry.
yeah, it was time to milk. I mean, that was, and they knew it was time to come into the farm. But anyway, I was supposed to go out and bring the cows in. And I noticed that there was always one lead cow, the same cow, every time. There was a red cow with a patch on the side. I thought, oh, that's the lead cow. Well, one day the lead cow got an infection in the ear, and they kept it in the barn for the veterinarian to work on. And that day, when I went out to get the cows, the lead cow was already in the barn. And the other cows didn't know what to do. There was no lead cow there. And they were moo, moo, they were walking around in circles. And finally, one other, Bessie, moved forward, started to lead. And they all followed this second cow. And it was the same second cow 3 or 4 days in a row. They selected somehow another leader, in other words. And until the original leader returned, and we had a vice leader, so to speak. And I watched that and I thought, my gosh, I think people are like that, aren't they? And they certainly are when you think about it. You go into any cocktail party, and you're going to notice there's one person that's dominant in that party. Maybe somebody comes in that's equally dominant. Now you have an interesting situation for a little bit while they vie for dominance. Usually one person rises to the top in the cocktail party. And if they don't, and if there's conflict, well, it gets to be interesting. But anyway, people are like that. So our enemies know that. They know that people follow leaders. They know that we come together in organizations, and that's where we find our leaders. So I'm belaboring this point. It's so simple that our enemies have used this policy of populating the leadership roles of the power centers of society with their people. And they study this tactic. They have textbooks on it. They have classes on it. And we wonder, what's happening? How did this happen? We don't realize that we've been under attack, almost like a military attack with strategies, and we don't know what's happening. So there you have it. The answer is we take back these power centers of society the same way we lost them. And that's by putting people in there, not just who are going in to take them over, but who have a genuine interest and a reason for being in those organizations. And they want to see that those organizations are following the ideology or the policies that they support. Now, how many of us say, oh, I don't want to go into politics. You know, that I hate politicians. They're all a bunch of slime bags. Don't catch me getting my hands dirty like that. How easy we make it. We don't show up for the fight. We don't show up for the battle. Of course, we're losing the war. There are strategies and tactics. I'm going to take a few moments to tell you about one of the most interesting experiences of my life. It was the 1960s. I was reading a textbook, a communist textbook, about something called the Squad Diamond tactic. Squad Diamond tactic was a tactic whereby, the comrades said, you can go into a meeting with 60 or 100 people, typical meeting, a small local group. And if you have 4 people, you can dominate that meeting using the Squad Diamond tactic. Now, really, what is this all about? So here it is. The Squad Diamond is named after a military formation. Those of you who've been in the infantry, you know that when the platoon goes through hostile territory, they're carrying their weapons like this. You don't go in a straight line or a phalanx because it's so easy for snipers to know where the next person is. They get one, and then the other one is right in front of it or next to it. So you never use a straight line or a straight vertical or horizontal line. You form into a diamond. And the platoon leader says, squad diamond, and everybody gets in their position. So it's easy, it's not so easy to find the next guy. So the squad diamond tactic is when you go to a meeting that you want to dominate in some way, maybe you want to get somebody nominated to a position, or you want to heckle a speaker, or maybe you just want to break up the meeting and they list all the things you can do with the squad diamond. I'm reading this thinking, wow, this thing really goes on. So what you do is you go in and you deploy your forces, one man or woman at the front, one at the back, and one at each side. And there's your 4. That's the diamond shape. And if you have more, then you complete the diamond with more people, but never put them in the center. The idea is that the people on the perimeter will start whatever action you decide, and it will force all the people in the middle to have to turn their heads and look around and say, oh, and they feel surrounded. It's a psychological thing. And that's the whole, this is the training that they do. Make the people feel that they are in the minority, even though they're in the majority, yes. So I thought, well, this is interesting. Maybe we'll try this. So we tried it. I got a notice that there was a meeting to be held, I think it was a Thursday night, at the Young Democrats Club in a little, well, it was, yeah, Young Democrats Club. Well, but the meeting was to honor the speaker, the fellow by the name of, let's see, I wrote his, yeah. Frank Wilkinson, that was his name, yeah, Frank Wilkinson. Now that doesn't mean anything to you probably, but back in the days when the Communist Party USA was full bore trying to discredit the House Committee on Un-American Activities and the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, the 2 committees that were investigating communist infiltration in the United States, the Communist Party naturally had to discredit them, and they were doing a good job by saying, well, they were un-American because they were, questioning people's political beliefs and ruining their reputation, and they were a bunch of McCarthyites, and that was the general line that they were using, and most Americans were buying into that. So that was Frank Wilkinson's mission. He was a very professorial type. You listened to him speak and watched him, and you would swear he was a professor at some local university. And he spoke very soft-spokenly, and he used sesquipedalian words, what does that mean, and so forth. Very intellectual type of guy. But we knew who Frank Wilkinson was. He was a known member of the Communist Party in Southern California. He was, in fact, on their leadership group. He was the man in charge of their security division, that was the division in charge of playing rough. That's where they intimidated people and would do physical things with people. That was the security division, they called it. And he was in charge of that. He was also in charge of, he was the man that went to all of the college universities and spoke against the House Committee on Un-American Activities and the the Senate Security Subcommittee. And he was very good at his job. I had heard him speak once before, and it almost made me want to jump up and say, yeah, down with the Un-American Activities Committee, because he was good. But I knew who he was and what his mission was, and so did everybody in my group. So we decided that we would go to this meeting and see what fun we could have with Frank Wilkinson. Now, he was at the top of his class in what he did, so we knew we were up against professionals. So we went, and we thought we had 6 people. Turned out we had 4 that showed up, and I was there as one of the 4. But it said in the manual 4 was enough, so in we went. So I took my position on the side. I remember it well, the right side, and somebody on the left side, and we had our 4 positions. And so Frank Wilkinson gave his dissertation about how un-American it was to question communist activity in America. And so when he was all done, are there any questions? Well, that was our moment. I jumped up. So I have a question, Mr. Wilkinson. Oh, yes, what is it? According to this report I'm reading here, that there was a member of the Communist Party in Los Angeles that says that they attended Communist Party meetings with you. Is this true, sir? And he turned red. He said, you're just exactly the kind of McCarthyite, the kind of person I'm talking about. You're bringing, questioning my loyalty, my Americanism, and so forth. You're the very kind of person I'm talking about. And everybody looked at me like I was a piece of dirt. I thought, oh, this is not going well. But the show had just begun. Yeah, the next thing I did, yeah, but Mr. Wilkinson, so-and-so says that, didn't you, aren't you the head of the security division of the Communist Party in Southern California? Isn't that true? And he's tried the same thing on this guy. Well, by this time, look, the arrow was dented this time, And then number 3 and number 4 did their part and was reciting from investigative reports on this guy. And the group got a pretty good idea of who he really was. And at that point, there was first of all, I have to tell you, most of these people were students. They were young Democrats. That was the name of the club, right? And most of them were students, but there were a couple of working guys in there, looked like they had just come from the assembly line, big bruisers, dirt under their fingernails, and blue shirts and so forth. They were real workers. The Democrat Party is supposed to be for workers, not college students. And this one guy stood up and he says, if this is the kind of speakers that this club brings in, he said, I just joined this blankety blank organization. And he tears up his membership card and strides out like that. And blow me down if 2 more people don't jump up and say, yeah, me too, And the meeting was over. Now, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I thought we were going to be assassinated. So when we got through, the 4 of us, oh, by the way, when you go in, part of the instruction manual says, don't let it be known that you're together. You don't come in together. It's, you're unknown to each other. It's deception. That's what they're teaching, And so we went out to the coffee shop, We're all shaking. We've just been in battle, And so we're sitting there drinking our coffee, and in walks Frank Wilkinson with 2 or 3 of his buddies. Now, had they used the same tactic on us, they would have completely neutralized us. But they didn't. They weren't expecting us to do that. So they walk in, and they walk by the booth where we were sitting. He's backed up. And he leaned over, I'll never forget this, practically in my face. He says, who are you people? He knew that we were united, that we were doing the same damn tactics that they were using. Now, there's just a little microcosmic glimpse of why we are losing this war is because we haven't been on the battlefield. They've had it so easy. They do that sort of thing all the time at meetings. And we sit around and say, oh gosh, I guess everybody wants this, And it's not true. It's time for us to get organized and fight back. That's where the battleground is. It's not fortunately, it's not on a battlefield with guns yet. Not yet. The real battlefield is in the organizational meeting rooms of the power centers of society. That's where the battle will be won. That's where the battle was lost. And if we wish to retain and regain our liberties, that's where the battle will be won again. Okay, I could go on and on and on. So, this chart. What this chart means is that Freedom Force in the center here represents the organization that we're putting together. And this group will be at the leadership level of that organization. But the members of Freedom Force, their mission is not to convert Freedom Force into an issue-oriented organization where we say, well, we're for this or we're against that, and we're going to petition or we're going to carry placards or write letters. No, the CFR doesn't do that. Have you ever seen the CFR member carrying a placard or writing letters to a congressman? No. Their mission is to go into the power centers of society. That's where they are. And then they use their influence to make the power center promote their agenda. That's our mission. That's our model. It's not a dishonorable model. It's the way democracy works. I'm not a big fan of the pure democracy, as you know. But since we do have a democratic dictatorship right now, we have to live within it. We have to follow the rules. And the rules are that we have elections, and these elections will follow the people in these groups will follow their leaders and the advice and influence of their leaders. We either play the game or we lose. So that's what Freedom Force is about. And so this chart shows that our members are influential in many, many different power centers. That's what those little PCs stand for. If you have a specialty, an interest, let's say it's education, there are plenty of organizations that deal with education. Become influential in them. That's where you'll find everybody else who is interested in education too. They may not have the view that we do. They may not understand what's happening, but they're there. Instead of waiting for them to come to us, which is the traditional model, we form an organization, we invite people to our meetings. No, that's not it. Unless we want people to become part of Freedom Force, you see. But we have to go to where the people are already there. And there are many organizations like that out there. And we're looking for like-minded people in those organizations who will then work with us. And then we have all these different organizations spread around. Some are dealing with education, some dealing with foreign policy, some dealing with health freedom, and so forth. And once they're all under the same ideological umbrella, they all know that the solution to their individual problem is not more government. Then all of a sudden we have a unified movement all across America, just the way our enemies now have. Everywhere you turn, you find all these groups and they're all coming at us from the same direction. They all want more government, more government, more government, higher taxes, less freedom. And that's their model, and that's the model that we are going to be following. Now, I've already talked about the attitude toward power, so I can skip over that. We've got to have power. And the next item on my list was the way that we protect against power corrupting our leaders. And I need to comment on that a little bit here. And that takes us to the second chart, which is it kind of looks like a target. And it simply shows the structure of the organization with the certified members on the outer ring. Certified members are those that cannot afford to support us financially or for some reason choose not to. We welcome anybody in Freedom Force, but it has been said several times here, we do need the funding in order to make it work. But those who cannot afford it, they're certainly welcome. And we show them in this outer ring. The real hardcore, though, of the membership is the chartered members. Those are the ones that everybody here is a chartered member. You know what that's about. Now, you also at this conference or this Congress, you also are all guardians, because we have to have guardians. Guardians are the ones who will elect the leadership council. So that's a very important responsibility, isn't it? Now, it's not for the membership at large to elect the leadership council, because we may have members who are not very well informed. They just have a feeling that they want to support us, and they do, and they come in and participate in this project or that project, but they really don't understand or care to understand the deeper issues of collectivism versus individualism and the necessity of diffused power and the holographic structure, and they go to sleep on you when you start talking about that. But they're certainly welcome in our organization if they'll help us move toward our goals. But those are not the people we want to be selecting our congressional delegates. That's the role of the guardians. And the guardians will have to be graduates of at least the basic level of the Freedom Academy. Now we have a new word injected into this whole thing. If there's one word I heard over and over again this morning, it was the need for education, 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 teaching, learning. And that's so true. Nothing happens without knowledge. And that's one of the problems with the so-called patriot movement today is that people are reacting against things they don't like, but they have no knowledge, no depth of understanding of why it's happening. And so that's why we want this organization to be really directed by a elite group within the organization, a group of people who feel deeply enough to enroll in the academy, the Freedom Academy. And they will have to pass a basic exam. Not very hard, I can assure you. Everybody in this room could pass the exam right now. But you are the elite, you see. And we have people in the organization that probably don't have much of an idea. What is this thing called collectivism? They're not ready for leadership yet within our organization. So this is the other part of the structure of keeping the organization from becoming corrupted, because our guardians, who are the product of the academy, are the ones who will vote for the delegates. And the delegates are, of course, the Congress. And the delegates will select the leadership council. And so you've got kind of a filtering effect here where at each level, the requirements become a little more difficult than just to be, like say in a democracy where everybody can vote whether they're on the dole or whether they're paying taxes or not, or whether they have an education. You know, their vote is just as good as the next guy. That's the terrible prescription for a free society. But so that's what this chart represents. And I'd like to call your attention to the last item there, which is the Judicial Committee, because this was the other element that fell into place after Annalisa showed up. And that is, supposing that Rockefeller approaches me next week and says, Griffin, you know, you're a good man. Don't you think you should retire and denounce your organization? I'm thinking, what are you kidding? I wouldn't do that. He said, well, how about $20 million? Well, no, I wouldn't do that. Well, how about $100 million? No, I wouldn't do that. Well, how about if I spare the life of your wife and your children? Now we're talking, you see. It's possible to reach anybody. Possible to reach anybody. So what happens then? What's the organization going to do if something like that should happen? Well, people like you, anybody that graduates from the Freedom Academy would know in a heartbeat that I had gone wrong, because I would start to do things and say things that violate the creed of freedom. You would know it, because you're graduates of the academy and you've been taught, number one, don't trust your leaders. That's your job. Don't trust your leaders. That's your primary job. Can you picture a society like that where people were told when we first go to school, don't trust your teachers, don't trust your leaders? It would make individualists out of them, wouldn't it? Okay. So that's the job of the guardians. And then, so somebody would have to say, well, Griffin has gone bad. What do we do now? The bylaws or the Constitution say that if there are 3 guardians that feel the same way, then the mechanism goes into motion and a judicial committee will be appointed. 12 people from the guardians, not the membership at large, from the guardians, and they will be selected at random. They will not be appointed by the president. Griffin won't have any choice in who gets to investigate him, like they do now in government. You know, they have these special investigative committees appointed by the crooks. So the computer random generated selection of 12 people. And if they don't wish to serve, they can step out, and then there's an alternate that comes in. But 12 will be selected entirely at random. And then they will examine the case, and whatever they say is it. No appeal, that's it. In some cases, there may be an injustice done, but in most cases, there won't. So not only the leadership, but any member could be removed from membership by the Judicial Committee. I think this is pretty interesting to me. I'm not aware of any other organization that's had a structure like this. It may not work, but wouldn't it be fun to give it a try? Yeah. All right, so that's kind of what that's all about. Let me move on. How are we doing here? Okay, I'm coming into the home stretch. So I would like to leave a couple of minutes for questions. All right, so the summary of this is that we're creating an ideological gyroscope. And that's the Creed of Freedom. Oh, I should read the Creed of Freedom. You've got it there, but I think for the purpose of this video, it needs to be read into the record. Because this is the gyroscope. This is the thing that binds us all together. And I have to say in all candor, if there's anyone here that cannot feel that this is right, then you don't belong here. We have to be all on the same page. And this is the only hard and fast rule we really have. This is the thing that we do require. Otherwise, we can get splintered. This is what protects us from being infiltrated and keeps us from being diverted in some way down the line. So I'd like to just read it. I believe that only individuals have rights, not the collective group. That these rights are intrinsic to each individual, not granted by the state. For if the state has the power to grant them, it also has the power to deny them. That is incompatible with personal liberty. I believe that a just state derives its power solely from its citizens. Therefore, the state must never presume to do anything beyond what individual citizens also have the right to do. Otherwise, the state is a power unto itself and becomes the master instead of the servant of society. I believe that one of the greatest threats to freedom is to allow any group, no matter its numeric superiority, to deny the rights of the minority, and that one of the primary functions of a just state is to protect each individual from the greed and passion of the majority. I believe that desirable social and economic objectives are better achieved by voluntary action than by coercion of law. I believe that social tranquility and brotherhood are better achieved by tolerance, persuasion, and the power of good example than by coercion of law. I believe that those in need are better served by charity, which is the giving of one's own money, than by welfare, which is the giving of other people's money through coercion of law. I believe that all citizens should be equal under law, regardless of their national origin, race, religion, gender, education, economic status, lifestyle, or political opinion. Likewise, no class should be given preferential treatment regardless of the merit or popularity of its cause. To favor one class over another is not equality under law. I believe that the human instinct for private property is a positive force because it provides an incentive for production, which is necessary for the material support of mankind. It justly rewards those who use resources wisely and punishes those who abuse them. Those without property must depend on others for survival, and those who depend on the state must serve the state. Therefore, private property is a human right, essential for prosperity, justice, and freedom. I believe in freedom to accept or reject any currency or other forms of money based entirely upon my personal judgment of its value, because a monopoly over the issuance of money is necessary for inflation and other forms of legalized plunder of the common man. I believe that the proper role of the state is negative, not positive, defensive, not aggressive. It is to protect, not to provide. For if the state is granted the power to provide for some, it must also be able to take from others. And that always leads to legalized plunder and loss of freedom. If the state is powerful enough to give us everything we want, it's also powerful enough to take from us everything we have. Therefore, the proper function of the state is to protect the lives, liberty, and property of its citizens, nothing more. That state is best which governs least. So, I poured my life into that thing, but I have to tell you what you already know is I stole it from all the great thinkers of history. No, there are no new original ideas in there, really. Maybe the one on money. Maybe the one on money. I actually stole that from Ron Paul, come to think of it. So. But you know, at first I had thought we ought to be firm on having what we would call a sound money system, you know, backed by gold or silver. I personally believe that. But some people don't, and they still are advocates of freedom in every other sense. And it occurred to me after reading Ron Paul's bill of freedom of choice and money or whatever it is, that's a better solution. Why should we say that this has to be this way? As long as I've got my freedom to choose, you can make your wrong decision if you wish, as long as I have the freedom to make a right decision. So that's why that got revised. Well, thank you for that. That's our creed of freedom. That's our gyroscope. And if we do our job, it'll be the same, hopefully 100 or 500 or 1,000 years from now, because principles don't change. People change, times change, technology changes, but principles involving human interaction do not change. So now I'd like to close off with this business about the miracle of commitment. In fact, it's more about the glory of boldness and the miracle of commitment. And I think a good way to begin that is with a quotation from, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, you know, the guy that wrote Faust and so many other great literary pieces, great German literature key figure from the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century. And he said, on this theme, he said so many things that really ring a bell. Here's one. He says, "Rest not. Life is sweeping by. Go and dare before you die. Something mighty and sublime leave behind to conquer time." Whew. Can't you just see that? Leaving something behind. Not just us. Not just our kids, somebody said, or our grandkids. It's something for everybody that we're creating here. And then, you know, he goes on. He says, "Dream no small dreams, for they have no power to move the hearts of men." So true. I mean, what we are talking about here has the power to move the hearts of men. And that's what gives us the unstoppable power. Yes, we're up against those with great wealth, with more money than you can imagine. In fact, they make the bloody stuff. So how can you beat that? They make the money. Impossible to beat it, right? No. We have something more powerful. We have the passion of leaving something behind. The big dream, no small dream. This is what captures and motivates men. If you have to pay men, of course you can get them to do almost anything, but they have no enthusiasm for it. We have volunteers here. We have people paying big money to be here, to waste their time thinking about these things. You don't have to pay people when you've got an idea whose time has come. And so I had to tell you this story. One more thing along this line. Stand by, I want to show you something. This is a DVD. It's called The Endurance. It's a documentary. I don't know if you've seen it. It's one of the most fabulous documentaries I have ever seen. It had nothing to do with freedom. It's the story of an exposition team under the heading of Shackleton. What was his first name? I've forgotten. Shackleton. Ernest Shackleton. And it's called The Endurance. That was the name of the ship. And the idea was that they went into the Antarctic, and they had 27 men with them. They all signed on. And they were going to explore the perimeter of the actual landmass in the Antarctic. And they got delayed. They got out of the port about a week later than they had intended. And they got stuck in the ice. Not only did they get stuck in the ice, but the ice crushed the ship. And there was so much footage in here they had a cameraman with them. And they actually took video, not film, I should say, of the crushing of the ship. And you can see the thing that, and it goes down, and the sea, or the ice, just swallows the ship. And they're left on this floating piece of ice on the Antarctic, and nobody knows they're there. They didn't have a radio. They were thought to be lost. They were there for 18 months in the Antarctic. And they had 2 lifeboats that they saved from the ship. And they were lugging these things with ropes up over the ice. And they were hoping to find the other edge of the ice pack. They didn't know it, but it was swirling. They were walking one way and it was swirling back the other. Anyway, they were stuck there down in the Antarctic for 18 months. And they came to the point of desperation. They said, we have to do something. We cannot stay here. We'll all die. And you see the parallel right away. We have to do something. And no matter how hopeless it seems, they got in their boats and they went to another drift of ice that wasn't turning. But then they couldn't stay there. So finally, after about a year of this, and they're eating blubber from seals and whatever they can find, and going crazy, by the way, from scurvy. A couple of these guys were actually going crazy, malnutrition. We have to do something, he said. So Shackleton and his navigator and 2 other men got on one of the lifeboats. They stole pieces from the other lifeboat to make the one as seaworthy as possible. And they set out into the sea, in the Antarctic Sea, with nothing but a sextant. And they were headed for an island which they knew was probably, I'm going to guess the numbers now, maybe 600 miles away, long distance away. A little island that had a whaling station on it and a human being and a little station where they had supplies for whalers in that area. And that was their ticket home. If they could get to that island, a little dot out in the middle of the Antarctic Ocean with the waves blowing and the clouds storming most of the time, they couldn't even see the stars. They found the island. They hit it. Bingo, right on. They were in that boat for weeks. The problems just began then. Here they found the island. You'd think that, oh, they're home free. Nope. The island has a big mountain on it, and they're on the wrong side. The whaling station is on the other side. There's no way to get around. Their boat by this time is all shattered. Nothing but jagged rocks and ice all the way. They had to go over the mountain. They didn't know what the mountain looked like, how steep it was. There were no trails, of course. No human had ever been on that mountain before. Covered with ice and snow and a big blizzard. They had to go. What do? We stay here and die? No. 2 men stay there, and the other 2, let's go. Off they go. And they struggle, they climb this mountain, and they almost die 100 times. They're slipping and falling in the ice. And they get to the top, and they look over, and it's a precipice. A precipice. They can't see all the way down anyway. They don't know what's down there. What now? We have to go. They go down. They either die or make it. They made it. They came to the station, they're knocking on the door, and this guy, what food? Wait a minute, he's the only guy in the middle of the Antarctic. Somebody knocking on my door. It's a fabulous story. And I just choked up when I think about it because this is our story. We have to do something. I don't care what the odds are. Let's do it. And that leads me to this final quotation from Goethe. He said it so well. He said, about commitment. He said, until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from that decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidences, meetings, and material assistance, which no man could have dreamed would have come his way. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic. Begin it now. Thank you.